Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Transformed You. Mark and Melissa DeJesus here, going through a series on healing from toxic relationships. This is a tough subject. It's a tough subject that affects everyone to some degree, and we're going to share our heart, and we're going to share some of the insights and some of the things that have been very helpful, but there's also a degree to this that is also painful, because we live in a world where the battleground is around relationships. Like, if you want to look at where we wrestle not against flesh and blood, where there's wrestling that's happening and spiritual battles, it's over relationship exchange, how relationships are formed, how we do relationships, how we communicate. And we get to these points where you recognize the relationship has become toxic. So we're going to get into that, but it's a tough subject, right?
Oh, is it ever?
Yeah. And let's start off. What we're going to do is we're going to eventually move into some helpful questions that can help you navigate. If you watched our last episode on this series, episode 1, we did our best to just kind of give an overview of what are some things that appear that show a relationship is toxic. We didn't cover everything, but we kind of began to just give a framework of it. Then here, what we're going to do is, like, what do we do? What do you do when you recognize the relationship is toxic? Where do you go from there? What steps do you take? And I think what I'd like to first acknowledge is that this is really challenging. And why is it so challenging? Why is it so difficult?
Well, I think just going back to what you said in the beginning, the war is over our relationships. And there's so many factors to it in how we were not trained up properly as children, which, you know, you use this word a lot, and I think it's such an important word that people don't think about. We weren't mentored, and we weren't mentored in the area of relationships. And a big one, I've often joked, because our kids are homeschooled now, but they were in the public school system for several years. And one of the big things that if I had any say that I would want to implement for young school-age children up through, actually should be everyone, is having conflict resolution and like emotional intelligent classes. There's so many things that they're not going to remember. But those skills, I mean, people are not even talking to each other across the dinner table. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it's falling on government, school systems. It's falling on other people outside to train up your child. I don't like it, but it's just what's happening.
Right. Because really it goes back to the family structure.
The family structure is so broken, and we're not even watching our mother and father talk to each other properly. And then we go out in the world, and it's like, hey, you don't even know how to resolve with a boyfriend or girlfriend. You don't know how to tell your friend that you were hurt. I mean, we're talking basic skills. So even I feel like getting to the point where you recognize that a relationship is toxic, there's a lot of work that needs to be done up into even dealing with what do you do, you know, our ending questions of like, what do you do with a toxic person?
So true. Just realizing it's a toxic relationship takes work to really underlie the factors in you, underlie the factors in the other person.
World, right?
So this is important because we go into relationships with dysfunctional, unhealthy patterns that we've noticed, that we've seen, that we've been under. And when you've been raised under that, you assume a lot of it's normal, to be honest. It takes time to realize, oh, that's not healthy.
Right.
So then you don't have references when your relationship is getting very toxic, or you're with a person that is abusive or harsh or
passive, because I don't want to interrupt you, but sometimes we think about that toxic word and we think it's an outward, violent, abusive, and passivity can fall underneath that too. I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, and
that's abusive too.
And that's where the term like passive aggressive was come up with, and there are relationships where the toxicity is very underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Many marriages have that, where it's hidden really well and under a lot of disguises or whatever you can put. It's hidden in certain workplaces. It's hidden in certain groups, and the passivity is, 'cause I need to explain what you said now.
Please go ahead.
So like passivity is, I need to relationally take initiative or act, and I don't. I sit back while something's happening. So passivity is very damaging to people. So a lot of homes for example, had a passive father. A lot of things that should have been addressed, he never addressed it, never taught it. He hung back. And so therefore it let a lot of hurt, evil just happen in the lives of either the wife or the children.
Right.
So passivity is incredibly dangerous. And it's one that we have to pick up on. Churches that are very passive in leadership and don't deal with things, organizations, so forth. So
yes, thank you for giving the little caveat there.
So I think that, what we lack is we lack references now.
Yeah.
And how do we do this? If you don't start to learn how to navigate relationships in a healthy way, you will default to what's comfortable. And you have to recognize that. Most people don't act on what's healthiest. They act on what's most comfortable. And then you'll surround the comfort with a lot of good answers and reasons
justifications, right?
And usually it's, I want to be loving.
Christians do this a lot. I need to just have grace.
Right. Exactly.
It's like,
and so it gets twisted to then justify the fact that we're afraid. We're afraid to deal with something. We're afraid to make a decision.
Yeah.
So if you're in a toxic relationship, you recognize it's toxic and you're afraid to do anything. That's something that has to be dealt with up front. It's like recognizing, fear's a driving force, fear's a driving factor. And I need to deal with that because what is it? What are you afraid of? You're afraid of being hurt, afraid of failure, most people are afraid of making relational decisions because it's like what the person's going to do to me. And then if I have to move forward or I have to make new decisions, I don't know that I can handle that stage.
Right.
Right. So we retreat back to what's comfortable. It's yuck. It's gross. It's toxic, but it's what I know. So we'll just kind of stay back.
Yeah.
And I think at the core of it, what a toxic relationship will do is not only challenge your references, your fears, it also challenges how you see yourself. Because in our work with people, we don't jump to here's the 3 decisions you need to make.
Yeah.
Here's kind of the 5 steps. It's really more, let's work on you. Let's work on allowing God to love you, show you who he is, show you his power, help you heal through areas. And then out of that, it helps to ignite your perspective. Because just giving you a quick 3 steps of what to do, you'll repeat those things in future relationships. You'll repeat the same patterns. You'll find yourself in the same kind of relational circles.
Yeah, and when you can have confidence in your decisions, even though it can still hurt, there is an empowerment and a boldness that can happen that you go, okay, I know this hurts, but this is the best for me.
Right. So I want to bring out this point. When we left our last episode, I had this thought, and it was kind of marinating that I wanted to communicate, is being with a toxic person. One of the predominant things that I notice because we have years and years of pastoral experience as well as coaching experience, one-on-one group setting experience of working through. It's probably one of the biggest things that happen behind the scenes in all settings. It's working through these relationship circles. One of the toxic patterns is the person who's very toxic makes you the problem, either in very overt ways or very like covert ways. You talked about the passive way, right? Kind of these passive subtleties, or they're always directing it right back at you. Maybe their anger comes out. Maybe their blame comes out. Maybe they get really spiritual and religious, and they quote a lot of scriptures. And even if you are a part of the problem, because it usually takes 2 in every situation, right? They're not willing to reason and go, hey, you know what? I got issues too. All right, let me hear you out. Let's hear each other out. When you have that, now you have you have the ability for the relationship to heal and move forward.
I can you just say it again? The ability to reason.
Yeah.
I think I don't want people to skip over that because it's very important. It's important that you possess that quality and the person that you're interacting with possess that quality.
Yeah, the goal is not like being right. The goal is not winning the argument. The goal is not making sure your side is taken. The goal is, come, let's reason together. Let's humble ourselves. Let's get to a heart-to-heart relationship. And let's agree we are going to move better with better decisions, better choices.
Right.
Right? That's really the only pathway that's going to improve things. Other than that, it's going to get into strife. It's going to get into just status quo. And it leads many people in toxic relationships to do nothing and just stay where they are and tolerate it. And then when somebody asks you about it, this is what I find. Somebody asks you about it, you got your 3 reasons why, that you're not making any decisions. Right. What am I going to do? This is the only job I could ever have. You're working with a toxic boss who's abusive, we have all these things that we come up with, and then we move into limited thinking. I'm doing a series right now on limited thinking. We get into victim thinking. We get into self-pity. We get into a trapped imprisonment, right? And that slowly and methodically begins to erode away at the life of your heart. Mm-hmm. We told you this would be a tough subject.
Right.
So what we did is we sat down and worked through, I don't know if we'll get through all of them or if we'll articulate all of them. We began to develop a series of questions that are important to ask when you're in a toxic relationship. And most of these questions can apply to any setting. Now, I have to say this up front. It's probably good if you're in a toxic relationship, you get some counsel, some feedback on your particular situation. Because many times we'll say statements and then somebody else will say, well, what about this over here? And it's like,
right.
Of course. It's very challenging.
There's nuances to everything.
Right. It's very challenging to put out the kind of content we put out where we're addressing issues. We're trying to give insight. We're trying to get input. And then somebody say, well, what about this? And they'll throw in this thing.
Yeah.
And then it makes it
Which
really.
I can understand. If you don't like what we're saying, just move along.
I don't know that they don't like what we're saying. I mean, I'm sure there is that. But it's more like you lay down a certain precept.
Right.
And it's like, well, what if this is in play? Oh,
right.
Okay, of course that.
Right.
You have to understand.
We can't cover everything perfectly in every scenario.
You can't talk out of the 3 sides of your mouth. There's only one. We're only talking on one subject at a time.
Right.
But I feel like these questions are really good to ask yourself. They apply to friendship, dating, a marriage, workplace, church you go to. Did I miss anything else? A group that you're part
everything,
of.
Right.
Neighborhood, friendships. I already said friendships. These are some good things to ask. They're questions because we're going to, as a framework of what to do with a toxic relationship, is give you some heart homework to let God work, because we want you to take a step back and have wisdom, because that's what we need, and that's what we're lacking in our brokenness, is we're lacking wisdom. So here's a first question, and this is a very simple one that I think is important to ask. Number one is, are you willing to work on yourself? If this person is toxic.
You should stare at the screen when you say that. Are you willing to work on yourself? No.
Right.
Sorry, I have to always add my humor in there.
Yeah, this is the tendency. When you're hurt, we want somebody to blame, right? And yes, people are a part of our traumatic, hurtful history.
Yeah.
They're just used as pawns of the enemy. Let's just face it. Their brokenness that's unhealed manifests towards you, hits on your broken areas that are already broken. And if not, it'll break it further, right? And so we become focused. Here's what toxicity does, is it causes us to become obsessed with that person.
Right.
So even if you get out or walk away, you're spinning because their toxicity slimed you, and now you're thinking about them over and over again. Oh, it was hurtful. And so you find yourself losing sleep at night. You're having dreams about them.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, you and I. Right?
Yeah.
Over hurtful situations where I'm like, okay, I'm spinning about so-and-so. I'm in the shower. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm making my coffee. I can't stop thinking about it. And you're all of a sudden just standing there zoned out, and you're having your imaginary conversations of what either A, you wish you said, or forward future conversations of what it looks like to confront the person or say what you want to say. I know everyone can relate to that. It's awful.
Right. So I think up front, if you're willing to work on yourself, it invites humility, because you're never gonna see anything relationally happen in your life without humility. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen.
Let me ask you this question. I did not plan this question.
Put me on the spot.
Okay. Do you think there is a part of dealing with people around you that there is a part of almost starting with a premise that what if that person just never changes? Is that like a doom and gloom kind of thing to not have an expectation, to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to focus on how I can heal and have no expectation of what if they never change?
All right, we'll go. I think we're going to get to that.
Okay. All right.
I think we'll get to that with some of the questions that we came up with. So let's that's coming.
Okay.
Number two. Let me get to, so the first one's, are you willing to work on yourself? The second one is an interesting question, and it's worth pondering over. Has the season of this relationship expired? Meaning that we find that a lot of relationships in your life are for a season. Not all, but many of them are for a season. Maybe that person was there during a certain time, or maybe they were your neighbor, or maybe you were close to them during that certain season. And maybe it's expired in not in a way of like it being this like they're evil or you're evil. It's like many times God sends people in your life because they carry something you need and you need to receive and understand or work on or mature. And is that season come to a close? I see this a lot when people move on from churches.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
They don't handle this well. Someone says, I feel this new stirring to go a new direction, and the church is hurt. You've been here, 15 years, and you helped us found this place. And there becomes a jealousy, a hurt. And so that person's departure doesn't happen with blessing. It happens where with I'm not even sure the wording. It's like they're saying we bless you, but they're not.
Right.
And then when the person moves on, there's a shunning, a closing off. The transition is difficult. It's not done well. And really, many times churches fail to see outside of their own local body, which in many ways can become their kingdom focus. It's like it's just this. They can't see beyond the bigger picture of somebody moving on. So maybe there's a mentor that was in your life, but that mentor's for a season, right? And you haven't stepped back to go, because if you recognize, I think the season's come to a close, you kind of just let it be.
That is hard, though. Don't you think that's just difficult? Because we don't. It's hard. No one that I know, we've talked about this a lot too. There's no good reference for conversations to kind of close out something too.
Right.
So many things are left open-ended.
Right. We have a hard time with that, especially if you have any kind of obsessive thinking patterns.
Well, and it's hard to just to meet with somebody because usually the two of you are not on the same page that the season's over.
Right.
Right. So to say, you know what? I think our season is done. I'm going to move on, and you won't be hearing from me, and you won't be getting any text messages.
Yeah, no announcement. If you come to that conclusion, there's no announcement. What I mean by let it go is don't put any pressure on it. I kind of see like where's this going? God, I love this person. I'm not going to like shun them. I'm just going to kind of let go and see what happens. Many times they might come back and go, hey, where you been? You've been ignoring me. And you kind of...
That's what I'm saying, though. It's usually one of the two doesn't handle it well.
Right.
Yeah.
And then from there, you kind of have some conversations to kind of see what's there and sometimes you just move on, and there's not going to be clear closure, and that's what's difficult.
Oh, that's hard. I think that's the difficult part.
It is.
Yeah.
All right, but that's just a question. That doesn't summarize the whole thing. Okay, these are questions. They all need to work together.
Ponder and think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 3, what's the true depth of the relationship? And what I mean by that is you have levels of relationship. You have at the core, the highest level of relationship is marriage covenant. Out of that, you may have 1, 2, not a ton. You may not. Most people, not a lot. You may have some covenant relationships that are not marriage, meaning we're going with it. We feel that God's bound us together to the very end, and that takes a lot of wisdom. And I think a lot of people jump into this prematurely. They go, "We're going to be covenant," and it's like it needs to have some time to see if that's where it's headed. Then you have your friendships. These are your people that you're close to, you're connected to, you enjoy time with, you share with. Then there's acquaintances. Right? These are people you see, maybe you volunteer with, and you see them, and you have kind of shallow conversations with, but it's okay. And you have neighbors, you have coworkers, right? Sometimes you need to ask yourself this question, because sometimes what we do is we apply covenant behavior to an acquaintance.
Very true.
Right? You sit an acquaintance down and you have this big conversation with them. That's not what you have. Sometimes you think you have a covenant relationship with somebody, and you have this kind of conversation, and you realize, oh, this isn't the kind of relationship I thought I had. I thought I had something
right
that wasn't there, because clearly by me sharing this, they're not really wanting to work on these things. And because a covenant relationship says we're going to work on ourselves. We're going to work on the things that interfere, and we're going to grow through them, and we're going to it takes that's a high level of relationship.
Right. I think most people look at their friendships deeper than they are. And I would say, even in my own experience, in trying to go to deeper levels, and the person shows me who they are, and I go, oh, okay, they're not. I would say most people have this habit. You go back and you try it again. You go back and you try to force it to happen. You go back and you try to do it again. And I think that's where we bump into a lot of, then we start to feel nutty. We're living in Nuttyville. And then we're like getting so violently angry at them. And then you develop bitterness. And it's like, no. They showed you who they are.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean?
That's a really good point. So sometimes that helps the expectation.
Yeah.
Of
seeing it clearly, what the depth is.
There are times where I've corrected somebody, and I was like, oh, I didn't have that kind of relationship. That's not the relationship that we had. And I learned it the hard way by trying to apply a covenant step.
Yeah.
Because in covenant, you go, hey, we got to work through this.
I want people to not take you incorrectly on saying you've had to correct someone. Right. Can you give a somewhat example of, I would use the term calling them to a higher level, or an invitation more than a correction. Like to say, hey, do you see it this way? Like, I don't want people to think you're sitting people down going, you need correction, because that's not how he operates in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So an example that comes to mind is one time in a neighborhood where I lived, there was a guy who was... he was slightly inebriated, but I didn't know that, and he was mouthing off to some landscaping workers.
Right.
And so I had known him. We'd had plenty of conversations, and I went over to go, hey man, like,
yeah,
gotta chill out. And he was intoxicated, and he went off on me, and I realized though in that moment, like, oh, that's not the kind of relationship we have, because he was acting unruly towards the landscaping guys in a really disturbing way,
right,
and was creating a commotion. And I was just trying to be, I was just trying to be helpful,
right.
And I have this thing that I've carried most of my life, where I naively thought, if we just have a conversation, this will all be fixed,
right.
right? If I explain it, so that was it became often a very dysfunctional. It's a good thought, but it often led me to dysfunctional places because it would go, oh, let's just sit down and talk, and then it would get worse. And I didn't understand some of these questions. What's the depth of relationship I have here? What's the do I have? Because if you have a deeper relationship, then you got to learn what it means to love in a deeper way. You got to grow in that.
Right.
You got to be patient. You got to know timing, things like that.
Right.
Right. And I realized in this moment, like, two things. One, I didn't have that relationship. And two, what came to mind, which I'll talk about at some point in this episode, is correct a scoffer and he's going to hate you.
Yeah.
And that proverb came to mind of the fool, the one who's the scoffer, who when he receives a word that is helpful for him, because someone loves him, he takes it and mocks it away and doesn't receive it.
Right.
To me, that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy.
Which we've encountered a lot.
Too much.
Way too much of someone laughing at you because, in a lot of ways they're uncomfortable with their own stuff too.
Right.
So,
what was that, number 3?
That was number 3.
Number 4 is I encourage people, when you're in a toxic relationship, count the cost. And what I mean by that is, what will life be like? You need to connect to this. What will life be like if I just continue to stay the way things are? What will happen to me? What will happen here? Because sometimes what we need is a sobriety of where we will head if nothing changes. And we want to stay, because you're going to default to what's comfortable. And you'll spiritualize it. You'll make it sound great.
Yeah.
You're going to default to what you feel is comfortable to not make those
Any
steps.
decisions, right.
Or to not make decisions, right? Because often the answer to what to do with a toxic relationship is I need a new mindset and a new decision pattern that I'm currently not living in, that I need to be able to. And so I often say this to people when it comes to change in their life. It's like, let's map out what happens if you do nothing. Like if it's something about their mental health, their emotional health, their weight, their physical health, their marriage. Let's talk to me about what happens if you, from this day on, you do nothing about it. What would it look like? Because a lot of people avoid that.
Yeah.
Because it's painful if they really outline and go, this is where I'm heading. And a lot of times they start crying. And a lot of times and it's like, yes, this is what you keep avoiding. And you binge Netflix, or, you
Go volunteer.
Or you stay busy.
Right.
Is you don't stop and go, wait a second, this is where my life's heading. And then 10 years from now, you're mad at God and mad at the world and numbed out, when it's like, no, there's decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, that's
in
good.
these toxic places. So the next one, number 5, is where we could probably park for a little bit.
Yeah.
And the question is, does this person have what it takes to work on things with me? Okay. Now, first I've asked you the question, are you willing to work on yourself? That's number 1. So you got to bring that into the equation. And before we get into that, I find people will say, I've got this toxic relationship and this is what's going on. Marriage, friendship, workplace, church, whatever. Have you talked to the person about it? And the majority of the time, they've never actually talked about it.
Right. That's true.
Sadly. And people will say, well, I can't because the person's not safe. Like we said we did a series on spiritual abuse, and we just brought out the subject that, we don't recommend leaving a church without having a conversation. And that's not a hard, fast rule. Sometimes you just got to get out of there.
Right.
We recognize that. But we've just noticed a pattern in society where people break off relationships without like connected relationships. You had years in history together without anything being said.
Right.
Right.
And then a lot of the time, I think what happens in churches, we've had this happen where we were in relationship with people. They just decided to never come back to church, but we were still seeing them here, there, and you're like awkwardly standing there like, hi, you made a major life change, and hey, how's it going? Like,
right. And so I'm like, there's an elephant in the room. Let's talk about it. Like, hey, what happened? And they would just dodge and skirt and it was like, wow, it made me aware of this is how culture does life.
yeah.
And I know this could confuse with one of the earlier ones, which has the season ended, right? and it could create some confusion. Well, you said just kind of let it go, let it be. I think that let it go, let it be comes out of at least, have you made some attempts to try?
Correct. Right.
And then you realize you're just forcing something.
Right.
That you don't need to force. Take a step back, let it be for a minute, and see what and see what God does.
Right.
But so the question being here that we're on is, does this person have what it takes to work on things? This is kind of the assessment, because most toxic people don't have what it takes to move forward.
Right.
And you're going to be left with a decision. Can
I just add something too? Because from my own personal experience I would actually take this question and twist it so that I would do nothing. So I'll give you an example. So if anyone's ever heard me talk about my history in previous podcasts, in my early 20s, I spent too many years with someone that had a pretty bad drug problem. And he was a dynamic personality. He could affect a room. There was a lot of great things. And I would look at those things and I would twist in my mind to not make a decision and say, like, if he got off drugs, he would be amazing. We would have amazing conversations. And the twistedness would keep me in it thinking, if I leave, I'm going to miss out. I think people do this with jobs, with a lot of stuff that, well, what if it's on the verge of changing? There is a twistedness that comes into relationships that needs to be dealt with when you're looking at this. Right. That I have heard people say this very thing.
So you're saying that
I don't like the way the question's worded. Do they have what it takes?
You're saying this needs a lot of wisdom, because people will say yes, and their codependency is saying yes.
Exactly.
That's the word. Their codependency is saying yes. I believe he does.
I would convince myself that I was going to miss out on something if I didn't stay in the game and give him the love that he needed to get off drugs, because, I felt myself that I was going to be the life-changing thing in this scenario.
Right. It's good. This is really good. It's really good. You're right. You bring up a phenomenal point, because
thank you.
We have to have wisdom in being able to know how to even answer this. Like, no, I'm going to save him.
I think a lot of people think that. Yeah, we do have a savior complex. A lot of people do.
Okay, so where I was going to go in this question was, I don't know that it's something that you can just fully solve before you do something. You almost need to have conversations that they reveal that the person is willing to have heart-to-heart and take action. And if you're into cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles, I want to know, number one, can this person have a reasonable conversation? And I'll attempt to have one. And if it stirs the bushes and all this stuff comes up and they defend it and you go nowhere, it's a signal to me, you can't go there with this person. Yeah. So I've gotten my answer. Usually, and
that's really good.
And in marriages, many times I go, we've done this 100 times, and you probably need some work. You probably need a marriage help from someone who's going to look objectively, but you both have to want to work at it, which is going back to this. Does this person have what it takes to work on things? Right? Because if you have those attempts and you have those conversations, you realize, wow, this person usually defense, anger, stonewall, twisted, throwback, blame on you, make you feel crazy. A lot of it's talked about like in narcissistic people kind of things and stuff like that. Yep. So you kind of have to come to a sober place of like, if it's no, then are you just going to just accept how it is? And that's only a decision you could make. Because many times people come to someone, I have a relationship problem, help me. And underlying it, it's like, can you rescue this so I don't have to make the tough decision? Right? Yeah. If it's no, do you just accept and just stay in it and go back to question number 4, count the cost? And this is your decision, right? Because we are the product of our decisions, and you're another decision away from everything changing and moving in a different direction, right? This is work. I could feel the tension over this as I'm talking about it.
I already want to lay on the floor and take a nap. It's right. That's my go-to. I'm exhausted by it. No.
It can be. It can be. So if no, is there a move on that needs to take place?
Yeah.
Now, you have to, like, when it comes to move on or not move on, people tend to follow in one of two ditches. One of the ditches, their move on cut off like quick. As soon as you get near that nerve in their heart, you're like, I'm shutting you up. You're right. You can see that a lot. There's a lot of unhealed pain, and they can tend to make everyone the enemy, and they just cycle through that. They get super close to somebody. Oh, you're amazing. Oh, I just love you. And then boom, they get disappointed and shut you off because they wanted you to be this amazing thing for. And the other side is you're not willing to make those tough decisions. So you kind of land in the guilt codependency. Love gets distorted. It's passive.
Which I think most people fall into.
Yeah. And so we, in our work, challenge that. We challenge that. It upsets people because they have their ways of defending status quo and calling evil good and twisting things around and just don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
Right? And Jesus didn't do that. He's very loving, very gracious. But what he brought always called people to decision. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be healed? Let the dead bury the dead. Come and follow me. Leave father and mother. It's like very, very intense yet very loving calls to a higher level.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's not about like you being spiritual enough or all these things. It's just deciding. And sometimes we want all the feelings to be there and then we'll decide. And I find in life the decision usually occurs first.
Right.
I make a decision on what's healthy, what's best. So it leads me to the next part, because if the person is saying yes, then what does it look like to have a heart-to-heart conversation with action? Okay, we're going to humble ourselves. What's the action step we're going to take? We're going to make sure that we stay in touch more. We're going to stay, or if it's a marriage, here's things that we're going to actually do out of our agreement together. Or if it's a workplace, here's a new pattern we're going to have. Because we've talked about this, we've had a good conversation. Don't leave heart to heart without what are we going to do?
Right.
Right? Because in the atmosphere of humility, God works powerfully, and your hearts are open. And later on, you can kind of go back into heady and dysfunctional patterns. In that place, decisions and actions need to be taken. Mm-hmm. But another question we need to ask that I think is important is it ties into 5. Like, is this person capable? Are you dealing with a fool or a scoffer?
Yeah.
This is really important. All of Proverbs talks about a fool. And at some point, I'm going to do some video content on I pity a fool, signs of a fool.
You have a lot of good stories that unfortunately you can't tell, but you've got some good doozies.
Well, I've had a lot of experiences with scoffers.
Yeah.
And when you do heart transformative work, it brings out the stuff that's hidden, and it will bring it out, and it manifests. It's like a demonic presence.
It is. Mm-hmm.
That comes out. Mm-hmm. It can even alter personalities. It's
right.
quite bizarre in what will happen.
You can look
in
and
those
go, well,
moments.
who is this person in front of me right now? Yeah.
So the basis of this is Proverbs 9:8 says, "Don't correct a scoffer, because he'll hate you.
Yeah.
If you rebuke a wise man, he will love you." Now, typically what happens with a wise man, he hears the correction, and it's good. It's done in love relationship. It still hurts. Yeah. It's still like, oh, right? It's not like, oh, that one felt amazing. That's not how it works. Like, oh. But after thought, they go, I hear you. I got to work on that. Or maybe they respond right away. If they respond right away, there's a lot of wisdom they carry. Folks, we lack wisdom. And if I was to share my greatest heartbreak in ministry, it would be person after person after person after person manifesting the traits of a scoffer.
Yeah.
That they can go to church, they can do a lot of great things in businesses, ministries, do a lot great. When you get into their inner world of how they do life with those close to them, or how they do life personally, there's a scoffer who rises up. So people say, well, what's the definition of a scoffer? Well, it's someone literally the definition of it is someone who laughs and speaks down about someone or a concept as though it's like silly or stupid. Right? That's kind of how it's like at first they just like diminish. Then as the conversation continues, it's laughed off, literally mocked away. Then there's a layer of anger. It's like it reveals, you're not going to tell me anything, even though their ways are damaging. Now, I will say from my experience, you can have your experience. From my experience, 25 years of ministry work, pastoral work, a lot of behind-the-scenes work. A large percentage of this manifests in our men. It's where the enemy has attacked heavily.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of fathering, the lack of mentoring, men create a world of walls around them of protection.
Yeah.
And so it creates the poser. It creates the fabrication. It creates the mask. It creates all these things that are built that are not solid foundations because they don't know who they are. There is no sonship there. But it's an inflated world that they rely on. Then you get to the real thing. So, for example, I'll be sitting in a coaching session with a guy who's very accomplished in his work. Yeah. So in my work and my approach, I'm all about the heart. So it's wonderful that you do that great work, but I'm not going to sit here and fawn over how great your work is. Mm-hmm. Right? So let's go a little further. Let's talk about how things going in your marriage, how things going in your heart. Now it already starts to get uncomfortable because they're not used to talking that language because it's about results, sales, achievements, those kind of things. So then it becomes very challenging what we do here. And when you dig in, you see the things begin to rise up. And a man really struggles with this. I know I've struggled with it because of the fear of being seen as a failure. That's the root system. The shame of rejection, of that fearful feeling that Adam felt in that moment when God said, what are you doing here? And Adam was honest, at least. I'm afraid, So I hid. And then he went into the blame game. It's the woman you gave me, and God, you gave me this woman, and it's her, and she did this. And men have been doing this ever since, right? And so there are many times, now I'm not saying that females don't have this, because I've certainly, and you have, certainly had my fair share of female scoffers.
But not as many.
Correct. Percentage-wise.
Yeah.
Because this is problematic, because when that's there, don't expect there to be change.
Right.
Don't expect there to be change. And so what makes it challenging, I've grieved over especially the past 15 years, is people that I've run with, and have done a lot with, ministry, building up teams, doing stuff. And to see this come out, and it sabotages the whole thing.
Right.
And I grieve because it hurts, but I grieve because I didn't know that was there. I thought it might be, but I didn't know it was there that bad.
Right.
And so so you have, and this is what a conversation looks like. So I'll share it with you. So a conversation looks like, listen, we've had a lot of history together. There's a new level that's available for us. There's some things that we see we can do together. But I have to address this issue, and I'm asking you. Did I always use the perfect words? No, but there have been times where it's even I've been on my knees.
Right, that's the truth.
Like I'm asking you as your brother. This is killing people around you. Your stubbornness is killing people. Right. There's been a few times, literally sitting in that meeting, a guy gets up, walks out the door, or other cases.
Sometimes, many years ago, a wife sitting there in pain, and the guy got up and left. Yeah.
Or a phone being hung up.
Yeah.
And I want to say this in recognizing too, I've had to grow, because I can just as easily be very defensive. When you do church ministry, people attack you a lot.
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes it gets like personal in how the attacks come. And I wasn't prepared for these. I wasn't ready for them. So I would get defensive, or I'd go into my over-explaining, right? That's kind of one area. But then there's this level where it's like, we're talking about these things we're going to move into.
Right.
But this is something we have to address. And the scoffer comes up, or the defensiveness. Yeah. And I would say that this is one of the biggest areas over the years that I've had to allow God to heal the most. Because when you roll up your sleeves, those of you that you do ministry work or you do one-on-one work with people, it's one thing if you're like a counselor and you meet with somebody and, you know, after it's over, you don't see them. It's another thing when you're doing life with people that makes it challenging.
Right.
When you're a pastor, you're doing life with these people, and then you have these toxic manifestations that rise to the surface. And it's like, now what?
Yeah. And that in and of itself is the conundrum of wanting covenant. Because at the end of the day, you could say, well, they're just the friend that I just connect to with coffee. No, at some point, one of you is going to want more in the relation. It's the nature of how God created us. He created us for intimacy, in relationship, in heart connect, in marriage, of the full encompassing of what that means. When you give your heart to someone,
right, to
go to levels with them, to connect in that way, and you become vulnerable, one of the people wants it more than the other. It's the nature of what relationships should be moving towards.
Right.
We're all not capable of doing that.
It creates a lot of pain and heartache as you recognize this, because you may be married to somebody who's like this. And you have to go through the sobriety of, now what?
Right.
Now what? Because, you know, where do I go from here? I think there's many times where I've had to accept that this person doesn't want the dynamic I'm wanting. I have an expectation. I'm getting angry because of the expectation I have over the relationship. And I have to realize they don't have that same expectation. And it's helpful. I find it helpful for me. I'll just show you what's helpful for me. It's helpful if I don't get into an us versus them mindset.
Right.
I want what God wants and they don't. You know, it's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that like, I'm good, you're evil kind of stuff. We all got a mixture in our lives we're working through. But coming to the sobriety of, here's what I want, and it seems like right now this person doesn't want that. And I need to let go of that pressure, be thankful for what I had or what I experienced.
Yeah.
But I gotta make some decisions right now. And we're not telling you what those decisions are. We just know you need to make them. So those kind of lay out like some questions. But in moving forward, I want to grow as a safe person.
Right.
So ultimately, what's happened in my life, you can share, you know, certainly your journey. Some of the most toxic relationships, like I've had some very like abusive conversations with people in ministry attack me. And it was traumatic. It took years and some time to work and process through. But it's like my long stem journey is like, okay, God, what can I learn out of that? What can I grow out of that? How can I get to a place too where I don't just completely just blanket demonize them?
Right.
I eventually want to have your perspective on them. It doesn't mean, sometimes people actually say this to me, I'm getting nervous because if you tell me to have a loving perspective about them, it means I need to get back into a relationship
Right, and
with them.
take their abuse.
Right. Never, not saying that at all. I have no plans on interacting with those people.
Yeah.
Right? But I want in my heart to have a compassionate viewpoint, to realize, God forgive them because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're coming out of their own brokenness. And it at times has helped me to go, I understand where they're coming from. I don't get it. I don't get all of it. I don't agree with their thinking patterns, but I get it. Because I don't want their sin and their baggage hanging on with me. And I don't want myself spinning in cycles of trauma over it. And it takes time. This stuff takes time to heal from. We'll talk about that in future episodes, and maybe send us some of your comments and questions or scenarios, and maybe we can help speak to that in episodes ahead. But I think that this kind of gives you some good questions to start with. But ultimately, I want to see people as God sees them. It doesn't mean I'm going to have dinner with them or be best friends with them. But I want to see them the way you see them, so that I'm not carrying that stuff in my life.
Yeah. And it's hard because I think in any relationship we look and we make it, we create these thoughts, we create these scenarios in my mind, in our minds, of how beautiful the relationship could be if we just would come together. Like, we create these imaginations about things and we don't fully just go, okay, this is where it is right now.
Yeah.
Or I know I've done this. Maybe you haven't. You can say if you have or not. Years ago, we went through a scenario with some church leadership. And then after years of going through some stuff on our own, we went, okay, we didn't agree with how they handled it, but I totally see why they decided to do what they did. I get it. I get making a hard stand about this, this, and this. So then inside you go, oh, awesome. Maybe we could have a great conversation and come back. No. Just when do you know what I'm saying? Like, you
literally brought up what I was going to mention, which a lot of times in relationship, we grow and we heal.
Right.
We feel better. We see the person through a better lens.
Yeah.
And we now go, oh, hey, I should go talk with them.
Yeah, I should write him a letter. I should get back together. It's like,
and then you realize the person's not changed at all.
Right.
And it's like, then you're spinning, beating yourself up. There is more, because what we're doing now is we're bringing you to the point of decision. And then I don't know where we're going to go next. We'll pray through it, but it'll probably be something of like, okay, the aftermath, where maybe you have to move on or move forward.
Right.
What does that look like? What does the actual healing look like? Because a lot of it is going to be involved, in your thoughts and dealing with traumatic stuff, or dealing with voices, words that have been said, and things that just following you while you moved on from them. But we hope this episode has been helpful. Do you feel like this is helpful?
I think it is.
There's a lot of emotional stuff in this.
I know, but I want to just say thank you to those who are so supportive and so loving. And it
does help. It does
read
help
all the
lot.
comments.
Yeah.
I do too. I click on all of them, and except if you're mean, don't be mean. No, but I just want to thank everybody for even welcoming us back. Like it was. We have a great community of people that follow us, and we really appreciate you.
If these episodes have been helpful for you, to your life, please share it with other people. Let them know, hey, this got me thinking. Our goal for this episode is that we just got you thinking. We're not trying to solve everything. We're not trying to be your counselors. We're just having conversations. We have given our lives to having conversations about tough issues that affect our heart. And so go to markdejesus.com, click on the donate button. That helps support these episodes and future episodes and articles and other video content that we put together. And get a copy of the Heart Healing Journey if you want to begin taking some steps in what does it look like to live more free from the heart. I would recommend in your journey that if you're going, man, this subject is really hitting home for me, I would really recommend exposing the rejection mindset, because this is what infects our relationships the most, is the filter by which we do relationship. We did a whole series on exposing the rejection mindset. You can find that. Have a book on it. I also have an online course. It's pretty extensive, and it's worth going through. I spent quite a number of months working, filming it, putting it together to go along with the book. But you can get it in paperback, audio, Kindle. Take advantage of that. But we thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to future episodes. Thank you so much, and God bless you guys.
Thank you, everyone.